My grandmother ran a kitchen for 60 years without ever once opening a cookbook. Not because she couldn't read, she read her Bible every night of her life, but because none of what she made lived on paper. It lived in her hands, in her nose, in the exact sound a hot skillet was supposed to make. I spent my whole childhood standing at the edge of that kitchen, just tall enough to see over the counter. And when she passed in 1991, all of it went quiet with her. No recipe box, no notes, just whatever I managed to hold on to from watching. So here's what I'm doing. I'm counting down 25 things she did in that kitchen that nobody ever taught her from a book. Some of them science can now fully explain. Some are just muscle memory turned into food. And the very last one might be the real reason none of this ever made it onto paper. If you want more of this kind of thing, hit subscribe now. Takes 2 seconds. Alright, let's start counting. Number 25. The coffee can of grease. Every stove she cooked on had a coffee can behind it, and every bit of fat off a skillet went into it, strained through cloth while still hot. Bacon drippings, sausage grease, fried chicken fat. All pooled into one all-purpose cooking fat that seasoned everything from fried eggs to green beans, carrying a smokiness you can't buy in a bottle. The one rule was strict: strain it clean while hot, or the burnt bits left behind would spoil the whole can within a week. Number 24. Cold hands for anything with a crust. For biscuits and pie dough, she kept everything cold. Cold butter, cold buttermilk, even her own hands run under the pump first. Bakers know why. Keeping fat in small, cold pieces means that in a hot oven it releases bursts of steam, and that steam is what pushes the dough into flaky layers. Warm hands melt the fat in too early, leaving nothing to create that lift, just a flat, dense result. If the dough ever felt greasy under her palms, she'd stop and chill the whole bowl before continuing. Number 23. Barely touch the dough. Watching her make biscuits meant watching someone almost not make them at all. Cut the fat in, add the liquid, bring it together, stop. Maybe 10 seconds of handling. The reason is flour chemistry. Work wheat flour with liquid and you build gluten, the elastic strands that give bread its chew. Exactly wrong for a biscuit. Overworked dough bakes up tough and dense. Barely touched dough turns out short and tender. Everyone's first biscuits come out like hockey pucks, and it's always the same reason. They handled it like it owed them money. Number 22. Get the skillet screaming hot first. Her cast iron skillet went into the oven with grease in it well before the cornbread batter was ready, heating until just short of smoking. When the batter hit that pan, it hissed loudly, and that sizzle mattered. The intense heat instantly sets the outside, so it crisps instead of soaking in, while the sugars in the cornmeal brown and turn toasty in a way slow heating never achieves. Pour that same batter into a cold pan instead, and you get a pale, soft brick with no bottom crust at all. Number 21. A spoonful of leftover coffee in the chocolate cake. Every chocolate cake she made got a splash of cold coffee, whatever was left in the pot. Food scientists have since figured out why this works. Coffee and cocoa share several flavor compounds, and the coffee amplifies those chocolate notes rather than adding a coffee flavor of its own. The cake doesn't taste like coffee at all. It just tastes more intensely like chocolate, the way it would with far more expensive cocoa. It only ever needed to be cold, leftover coffee. Number 20. Salt in everything sweet. A pinch of salt went into every cake, pie, cobbler, and batch of candy. This one is real chemistry. Salt on the tongue quiets bitter notes while making sweetness read as more intense. So a small pinch makes something taste noticeably sweeter without adding sugar. That mattered when sugar was expensive. Leave the salt out of a dessert, and it doesn't taste less salty. It just tastes flat and strangely lifeless. And most people can never quite explain why. Number 19. A slow pot of beans cooked all day. Her soup beans went on in the morning and simmered low until evening, 4 to 6 hours. with just a piece of fat back. The goal was letting the beans slowly break down and thicken their own liquid into a rich broth, which is why they're called soup beans, not boiled beans. Rush it with high heat, and the beans burst outside while staying chalky inside, with a broth that never thickens. And she was firm on one rule: salt goes in at the very end, because salting early toughens the skins. Number 18. Never pour out the flavored water. Nothing with flavor in it went down her drain. Bean liquid, ham bone broth, potato water, the liquid from cooked greens, all saved and worked back into something else. The liquid from a pot of greens carries most of the nutrients and flavor cooked out of them, so she'd soak cornbread in it rather than waste it. Potato water went straight into bread dough, where its starch feeds the yeast for a taller loaf that stays soft days longer. Number 17. Wilt spring greens with scalding hot grease. The first tender lettuce of spring got torn into a bowl, and she'd pour bacon grease straight from the skillet over it while it was still boiling hot, with vinegar mixed in. The scorching fat wilts the greens instantly, while the vinegar cuts through the richness so it never sits heavy. It landed exactly when the root cellar was empty and nothing green had come in yet. The grease had to be truly hot. Anything less just makes a sad, cold, greasy salad. Number 16. Brown the flour before the gravy ever sees milk. For sawmill gravy, she'd brown the flour in hot grease first, stirring until it turned the color of a paper bag, before any milk went in. That step cooks out the raw, pasty taste that ruins so much homemade gravy. The milk then had to go in slowly, off direct heat, or it would seize into lumps. With that method, a half-pound of sausage could stretch to feed 8 people, because the meat became the seasoning rather than the meal itself. Number 15. Buttermilk. In nearly everything. Because there was always butter being churned, there was always buttermilk, and it went into biscuits, cornbread, pancakes, even the soak for fried chicken. It does 2 things at once. Its acidity reacts with baking soda to release carbon dioxide for rise, and that same acid gently breaks down gluten, keeping the texture tender. That's why older recipes call for buttermilk and soda, while newer ones lean on sweet milk and baking powder. She'd never throw out buttermilk that had turned extra sharp. She baked with it anyway. Number 14. Never let biscuit dough rest. This runs against what most people assume. The moment buttermilk and baking soda meet, they start releasing gas immediately. And that gas is your rise. It doesn't wait around. Let a soda biscuit sit on the counter, and a good portion of that lift escapes into the air before it ever reaches the oven. Yeast bread benefits from resting because yeast keeps working. A soda biscuit doesn't have that luxury, so it went from bowl to hot oven as fast as possible. Number 13. Corn and beans wrapped and boiled together. Borrowing from an older Cherokee tradition, corn and bean dough got wrapped in soaked corn shucks, tied tight, and boiled. What settlers came to call bean bread. The wrapping holds the dough together in boiling water and adds its own flavor. There's a nutritional pairing hiding underneath too. Corn is missing an amino acid that beans provide, and beans are missing one corn provides. So together they form a complete protein neither delivers alone. People relied on that pairing for centuries before anyone understood why it worked. Number 12. Leather breeches, beans dried on a string. Green beans got strung whole on thread and hung behind the stove for weeks until they dried down hard and papery, shelf-stable for a full year. Moisture drops low enough that nothing can spoil them. The same principle as jerky. Come winter, they'd soak overnight and simmer for hours with fatback, coming back deeper and a little funky, rather than tasting fresh, which mountain families actually preferred. The one real danger, they need dry air to hang in, or they mold on the string instead of drying. Number 11. Fermenting vegetables in a stoneware crock. Before cheap glass jars existed, her mother kept corn, beans, and cabbage submerged in salt brine inside a stone crock, weighted down with a scalded plate and a creek rock. The salt keeps harmful bacteria out, while naturally occurring good bacteria ferment the sugars into acid, and once sour enough, nothing dangerous can survive. It cost nothing to run. No jars, no lids, no fire. The one unbreakable rule: vegetables always had to stay fully submerged, or a piece bobbing to the surface would mold and ruin the whole batch. Number 10. Pickling whatever the frost was about to kill. When a hard frost was coming and there were still green tomatoes, cabbage, peppers, and onions that would never ripen, she'd chop it all, salt it overnight to draw out the water, then cook it down in vinegar, sugar, and spice into what's known as chow chow. It wasn't a fixed recipe so much as a practical answer to a dying garden. Whatever was still standing went in. It sat on the table all winter, adding sharp crunch to a plate that would otherwise be all beans and starch. Number 9. Using a spring house instead of an icebox. With no ice or electricity, her family kept milk and butter cold by building a small stone structure over a natural spring and setting containers directly in the running water. Groundwater stays around 52 to 55 degrees year-round, and the constant flow carries heat away steadily, outperforming early mechanical coolers. Butter kept for weeks, milk for days, even in July heat. The real skill wasn't the little building. It was knowing how to find a reliably cold spring at all. Number 8. Timing fermentation by the moon. Her mother made sauerkraut by lunar signs. To be honest, there's no science saying the moon affects a crock of fermenting cabbage. But here's what was actually true underneath. Making kraut by hand for decades teaches you to recognize the exact smell of it turning sour correctly versus going wrong. The moon calendar was just a framework for that hard-earned instinct. She could walk past a crock and know by smell alone whether it needed attention, and no almanac taught her that. 60 years of paying attention did. Number 7. Rendering lard the slow, careful way. After a hog was slaughtered, turning the fat into usable lard fell to her. Cut small, cooked low and slow. Never scorched. Strained clean while still hot. Rush it with too much heat, and the lard browns and won't keep. Done properly, it comes out nearly white, keeps for months, and makes a pie crust store-bought shortening can't replicate because of how the fat crystallizes. Even the crispy bits left from rendering got saved and stirred into cornbread. Number 6. A splash of vinegar in pie dough. She'd add a small spoonful of vinegar to the water used for pie crust, and bakers confirm exactly why it works. The acid slows down gluten development while the dough is being handled, keeping the final crust tender instead of tough. That acidity fully bakes off in the oven, leaving no trace of vinegar behind in the finished pie. It bought her a little more forgiveness while working quickly, which mattered when she was rolling out 4 pie crusts at once for a funeral gathering. It only ever took a small spoonful of plain white vinegar. Use too much, and you'll actually taste it. Number 5. Keeping a sourdough starter alive for generations. A crock of bubbling flour and water starter lived on the back of her mother's stove for years, fed regularly, and used to leaven bread long before store-bought yeast packets existed. It's really just wild yeast and naturally occurring bacteria from the air, living in the flour, simultaneously raising the bread and giving it a sour edge. Families passed a starter down like a piece of furniture, and if it ever went too long without feeding, it would die completely. And if it had belonged to your grandmother, that exact culture was gone for good, no matter how carefully you started a new one. Number 4. Judging frying oil temperature by eye. No thermometer ever hung in that kitchen, yet her fried chicken came out perfectly every single time because she tested the lard's heat by dropping in a pinch of cornmeal and watching exactly how it behaved. Meal that just sits there means the oil's too cold and the food soaks up grease instead of crisping. Meal that scorches black means it's dangerously too hot. Meal that dances and browns slowly and evenly means it's exactly right. That instinct came from decades of frying, watching that same reaction play out thousands of times until she didn't need to think about it anymore. Number 3. Curing an entire hog in salt and hickory smoke. After hog killing time, hams and shoulders were packed in salt, brown sugar, and pepper, and left to cure in a cold space for 6 weeks. The salt draws moisture out of the meat, and meat without moisture simply cannot rot. That's the entire principle of curing in one sentence. The temperature had to stay in a narrow window the whole time, since too warm risked spoilage before the salt fully took hold, and too cold meant the salt never penetrated properly. After curing came 30 days of hickory smoke, never pine, followed by a full year of aging before anyone was allowed to cut into it. Number 2. Cornbread crumbled into a glass of buttermilk. The plainest meal her family ever ate, and one most people alive today have never tried. Cold cornbread broken up into a tall glass, buttermilk poured over the top, eaten straight out of the glass with a spoon. That was supper on countless nights when everyone was too worn out to cook anything else. And it works better than it sounds. Corn is missing a nutrient that buttermilk supplies, so together they hold you over until morning, in a way cornbread alone never could. Nobody in that kitchen used the word nutrition. They just knew it worked. Number 1. Cooking with absolutely no measurements at all. She never once used a measuring cup or spoon in her entire life. A handful of this, a couple of fingers of that. Flour added until it simply looked right. She knew biscuit dough was ready by exactly how it pulled away from the side of the bowl. Knew a cake was finished by its smell before she ever opened the oven door. Knew beans needed more salt by tasting the broth straight off the back of a spoon. That wasn't carelessness, it was the opposite. It was knowing something so completely in your hands that a measuring cup would only slow you down and mislead you, since a cup of flour weighs differently on a humid day than on a dry one, and her hands always knew the difference. She could hand down the ingredients. She could never hand down 60 years of standing at that same stove, and that's the part that actually disappeared when she did. That's the real reason none of this ever got written down. It was never really about recipes. Recipes are easy to save. What's genuinely gone is the feel in someone's hands, and there's no writing that part down, no matter how hard you try. So here's a challenge. Pick one of these, and do it by feel instead of by measurement. Pour that hot grease over spring greens. Get the skillet screaming before the cornbread goes in. Or just crumble some cold cornbread into a glass of buttermilk and see for yourself that it isn't sad at all. It's just honest food.